And we are back with another episode of the top 50 albums of the 1950s. The third episode, to be exact. We are counting down numbers 30 through 21. So we're going to get more than halfway there on this episode. And we're getting into the real cream of the crop here. Very exciting. And as always, with Nathaniel A. Hart, excited to get this one knocked out of the park with you, man.
Yeah, me too. Let's hope we have the energy to do it. But
Yeah.
this episode, man, I think this might be the only episode in this any of these countdowns. Well, maybe not any of these countdowns, but specifically in this one where I love every single album we'll be talking about. I'm just going to say right up front, all these records are great. There's no slouchers here, and I can't wait to discuss all of these records.
Yeah, me too, man. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right to it at number 30.
Used to Be Duke by Johnny Hodges from 1956. Now, I'm really happy that this one is this high on the list, considering I just heard this and I know most people haven't. This is seemingly more of an obscure lost gem from this era, as Johnny Hodges I think often goes that way. And I gotta shout out filmmaker Fernando Trueba, because when I saw they shot the piano player at TIFF, the documentary about Tenorio Jr., I asked him what one of his, some of his favorite jazz albums are, and of course he said Kind of Blue, no surprise. And he said, I forgot which one he said, but he mentioned Johnny Hodges, and he said his playing is so beautiful, it just makes you want to cry. And I was like, wow, like that's a pretty, solid endorsement, especially from this guy who's obviously so passionate about jazz music. I was like, I got to check him out, and I checked out one of his albums from the 60s, which I really loved. But before, finalizing my list for this countdown, I was like, well, let me check out one of his 50s records, which ended up being Used to Be Duke. And to be honest, not only is this one of my favorite albums from the 50s, this is one of my favorite albums of all time. Definitely around top 30 of all time. This album is
Wow.
extraordinary. Yeah, man. This is one of my favorite jazz records, right up there with the very best of them that we've talked about or perhaps haven't talked about yet on this countdown. And what I love about Johnny Hodges especially is I think he really had the greatest tone out of any jazz player ever, because the way he plays the alto saxophone, you hear like the phrasing, it's like he's pouring his soul into every single note, and it feels like he's singing in a way. It sounds like he's inflecting the intonation, everything about it. It's so emotive. It's so lively. Everything about him. He's one of the greatest players just from a emotional standpoint. I think feel is really really important when it comes to jazz. You can solo like Coltrane all day. Well, most people couldn't, but even so, there's something about his playing that's just so intrinsically beautiful. But I think the thing that's amazing throughout this entire record, it's not just him, is I think this album features some of the most expressive phrasing in all of jazz music. The way this album plays with the crescendos, decrescendos, just yet again the emphasis on certain, notes that these players are playing throughout this entire record. And there's so many different amazing instrumental solos on one track, especially the title song, which is almost 8 minutes long, and it's easily my favorite on here because it's like you get so many different solos from so many different instruments, and it feels like every single one gets a second to shine in this epic of a song. But yet again, all the other songs on here are really great too. On the Sunny Side of the Street is a great interpretation. Sweet as Bear Meat is one that's like really 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 great, and very interesting title. I also love Warm Valley, but really, even though it's not, I wouldn't. I know it's called a medley, and it's like it's probably on the vinyl. It is one track. Like But the thing that's interesting, it's all these classic American standards on just this one track on this disc, even though they're all pretty segmented. But yet again, that's probably fuller, a probably more fruitious attempt at what as I was saying earlier, where every instrumentalist gets a time to shine, but more so on like each song. And I really think Autumn in New York is just one of the most beautiful on the album. I think Richie Powell's piano solo is one of legends. I really think that's one of the most beautiful, mind-blowing piano solos in all of jazz. But even when you end on Poor Butterfly, it's just, oh my goodness, the energy, the yet again everything about it, the way it builds. It's just such a perfect way to end this already incredible album. It's not too abstract. It's pretty straightforward, but yet again, what all these instrumentalists pull out of every single one of these songs is nothing short of incredible. And I really think everyone should listen to this record because it's truly amazing. And I think, an underrated classic, an overlooked classic, but also one of the best of all time.
Yeah, man, you said it all, and you turned me on to this one, man, and
Yes, I
I'm very
did.
thankful for it. And it is one of my favorite jazz albums now, and it was pretty high on my list. I think around number 13.
Mm,
So yeah, I'm glad to see it this high. I think it should be higher. I
I
mean,
agree.
it's just like it's one of those jazz records that's like perfect length. It starts out strong. It really never loses steam, and I
No.
really love the medley on side two. I mean, it's just like you said, it ends perfectly, but all those jazz standards are just done with such class and finesse, and as you said, Johnny Hodges, like there's not really anyone that sounds quite like him. It sounds almost like a human voice like singing or
Yeah.
something. And you mentioned Coltrane. I didn't realize till just now that he actually plays on the first three tracks
Yeah.
on
Doesn't
tenor
have a
sax.
solo though,
Yeah,
but
yeah, but this guy gets around like a record, man, in the 50s. So,
that is true.
but yeah, man, definitely just fantastic from start to finish. If you're new to jazz and want to get into a great one, this is a great place to start. So, great pick, guys. And yeah, that'll now bring us to number 29. Soul Train by John Coltrane from 1958. There he is, the guy
Just
that's
talking about
getting
him.
around.
Yeah.
And yeah, another great record by this guy. We even talked about him in the 60s already a couple times. His first time making the list with an album of his own on the 50s here, and a great one, like really solid, just five tracks altogether and just under 40 minutes in length. But, as opposed to Johnny Hodges, who has more of the like finesse and just the beautiful sound, Coltrane kind of, a little bit all over the place in a good way. As if you're familiar with his playing, you already would know that. But yeah, this is kind of a sequel of sorts to Blue Train that came out the same year, which I love Blue Train a bit more, but Soul
Me
Train I
too.
think is really solid. This also was in my top 20, so I feel like this is a good spot for it. I also like you, I'm pretty sure, like Used to Be Duke a bit more
Hmm. Oh, a
overall.
lot more. Yeah.
But this is another great jazz album on the list, and from the opener of Good Bait to the closer of Russian Lullaby, which is like the Irving Berlin song, his take on it, which is just wild. It's he's incredible, and of course you got Paul Chambers on bass, who also was on quite a few amazing jazz records in the 50s. But yeah, it's freaking Coltrane, man. So yeah, he's got to make the list. So yeah, what do you think about this one, man?
Yeah, I love this album. It made my list, albeit it was at the bottom. Basically, it was like the bottom like three records on here. So I do think it should have been on the list. I would have placed it a bit lower. So suppose is a fair compromise. But yeah, I mean, it's not Coltrane's best record by any stretch of the imagination, but it's still a great one. And like you said, I mean, just the energy on this album is unbridled. But I really want to mention the almost 11-minute "I Want to Talk to You," which is personally my favorite song. It's just so beautiful. Even though it's very elongated, it's just, he really draws you in with the sound of his saxophone, and yet again more straight, so hard bop as opposed to a lot of the stuff he would be doing only a couple years later. I do think this album slows down a little bit in the middle, but once you get to Russian Lullaby, I mean, that's such a wild interpretation, of what would seemingly be a slow, plaintive, sort of lullaby. It just moves at such a breakneck pace, and really is such an amazing way to close out this great record. Yet again, not the absolute best of Coltrane's career, but I definitely think it's deserving of a spot on this list. And I love this album, and thank you for letting me know about this one, because I definitely think that this one goes a bit underappreciated and underrated in Coltrane's discography nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's been a fun part of this process, just kind of sharing things back and forth as
Yeah.
we go. I was going to say earlier, the Johnny Hodges thing, that kind of made my list at the last minute. I had to bump some stuff off to get it on there, but
You're welcome.
boy, am I glad we did. So yeah, that's going to now take us, guys, to number 28.
And just a gigolo, and everywhere I go, people know
The Wildest by Louis Prima from 1956. Yes, so glad that this album is this high on the list. And technically, I think this should be higher because, like used to be Duke, this was in my top 10 of the 50s, which it's also in my top 50 albums of all time. I think this is one of the greatest records ever recorded, especially from this decade, because Louis Prima, I mean, here comes this guy who's been recording music since the 30s. And he comes in and he rocks harder than all these dudes. Elvis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, you name it. Like, this, the swing is in full effect. In the way he infuses jazz, swing, and rock and roll in such a, yet again, like a very energetic, bombastic sort of way. I mean, this is the definition of energy captured on record. Of course, just from the opening medley, Just the Gigolo, I Ain't Got Nobody. I think that's easily Louis Prima's most iconic track. Just from that opening piano, that dun 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 dun, and then just him go, I'm just a gigolo, like that. That voice is so iconic, and nobody sounds like him at all. It's Louis Prima when he comes on, and of course, just his famous scat singing, I think is like probably the most notable out of, like, of course it wasn't as technically perfect as Ella Fitzgerald when she did it, but it's pretty damn close, just yet again he just starts breaking out into gibberish at the time, or he'll start singing in like Sicilian. And this is the other thing that's so great about Louis Prima, is at the time a lot of artists were kind of discouraged to embrace their ethnicity, and sure, he was an Italian American. It wasn't like he was black or anything, because that's more meaningful. But yet again, he was the first one to really bring it out in that way. Like this, this guy is Italian through and through, and he shows it through so many songs on here, like "Oh Marie," where he starts, breaking down that song in another language, and really embracing that in that way. And of course, yet again, as a trumpeter too, he's so great. And of course, having like Sam Butera on here, and of course his wife at the time, Keely Smith, they all have such insatiable chemistry with each other. And at certain points you even hear him cracking up. Like, this is such a fun album to listen to, and at 32 minutes, like, it moves by at a clip. You're always entertained throughout this entire runtime, just from the second track, Nothing's Too Good for My Baby. Great hook. Body and Soul, I think, is like almost like a Bohemian Rhapsody level jazz epic, just in scope. But Louis' trumpet playing on this is absolutely insane. So beautiful, so surprising in all the directions it moves in. One of my absolute favorites, maybe even after the opening track. Another medley, Basin Street Blues, When It's Sleepy time down in the South. Yet again, these medleys are just so energetic and just really capture your attention and just so much fun. Jump, Jive, and Wail, of course, is an iconic Louis Prima song. Bonacera is one of my absolute favorite. Yet again, Bonacera, senorita, Bonacera. It's time to say goodnight to Napoli. I mean, come on, and just the piano underneath, and then the way it turns into like this whole, really breakbeat sort of, swing rock and roll song in the second half. The way they bring it back around, it's amazing. I'm not as huge of a fan of the Lip. It's a little bit dated to me. And Night Train, it's a decent instrumental, nothing like too crazy, but still really nice. But yet again, ending on a song like I'll Be Glad When You're Dead, You Rascal You. I mean, pretty bold to put on a record in the 50s. Just the subject matter and just the vindictiveness of the song itself, but yet again, it's just another absolute stomper.
That's one of my favorites, actually.
It's you couldn't think of a better way to close it, right?
Yeah, and so much energy, like energy wise, like this is on par with like the Count Basie album that we already talked about
even
early
so,
on.
I think.
And the swing music, you gotta love it. And I didn't have this quite as high on my list, but I mean, absolutely, like you said, there's nobody that quite sounds like this guy. His vocals, and obviously was very influential because, I mean, just a couple of the songs you mentioned, Just a Gigolo, David Lee Roth did his take on it in the 80s, pretty much just mimicking this version. And then Jump, Jive, and Wail became a huge hit in the 90s with Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, which I didn't even realize this was a Louis Prima original tune, which is mind-blowing. I mean, it's so good. And Night Train, I've heard better versions of that track, but and that's an instrumental, so we're losing the Wildest himself on that one. But for, like you said, at just 10 tracks and really condensed here, it's pretty great, and I'm so glad that it made the list because I was kind of worried it wasn't for a little while until some more people voted for it. But yeah, Louis, man, great one. So great pick, guys. So that is now going to move us to number 27. In Person by Tony Bennett and Count Basie with his orchestra from 1959. Yes, man, I love this album so much. And another one that you told me about, Nathaniel, so thank you very much. But yeah, I mean, come on, man. Tony Bennett, just one of the best vocalists of all time. Rest in peace. And of course, Count Basie making the list once again. And what a collaboration between these two, because you often think of Count Basie's work with Sinatra, of course, another singer in this vein. But man, just especially after we lost Tony Bennett, I listened to a lot more of his music that I hadn't heard before. And this album especially, man, just again, talking about energy, man, just coming out of the gate with songs like Just in Time, When I Fall in Love, Taking a Chance on Love, just beautiful, and just so much excitement. And Tony Bennett, in some ways, is a better vocalist than Frank Sinatra. Like just what he's capable of hitting some of those high notes, just incredible. And then of course, his version of Pennies from Heaven, just every single song on here is an absolute classic, even towards the end with like Lullaby of Broadway and Old Man River. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those albums at just 12 tracks and under 40 minutes. It goes by real quick, and it's one that I've listened to multiple times already, just whether I'm like really paying attention, or you can have it on kind of in the background, having some good Italian dinner. It feels like one of those kind of albums. I just love it, man. And yeah, so glad that it made it. This was I think number 12 on my list, so I would have liked to see it even higher, but yeah, great pick, guys.
Yeah, I think I had it a little bit lower. I actually had it at 33. So I think, that evens out pretty well. And I'm, really glad I turned you on to this, because it sounds like you even love this more than I do. Because I will say, Well, great to see two Italian American singers back to back on this countdown in this episode. But yeah, this is my favorite Tony Bennett album personally, and
Me
yet
too.
again, where I kind of came to that realization that he probably was a better singer than Sinatra in regards to vocal range. I mean, just taking a chance on Love Alone, which also appears on I Left My Heart in San Francisco, if you guys are big Tony Bennett fans, which I'm assuming quite a few of you are. Yet again, it's just such, it's under 2 minutes, but it leaves such an impact. It's one of my favorite Tony Bennett songs of all time. Just when he hits that, I'm taking a chance, he hits that high C. I could do it better at another point, but it's just really incredible that full voice that he had and the way he utilized it. And I think it's never been utilized more or better on this than this record, you could say. And a lot of songs, I have to mention Fascinating Rhythm as well, even though it ends a bit abruptly, but yet again, like, they're playing so fast on here with so much energy. It's just unbelievable, and Tony is more than up for the challenge. Obviously, on all these tracks, "Pennies from Heaven" I think is really one of my favorite renditions. Not better than the Louis Prima version, but definitely up there. I think some of the songs in the middle kind of slow down a bit, or near the end, you could say. But really, he brings it back around on Lullaby of Broadway, which is one of the best versions of that song. He's recorded a few versions of it, and I definitely think this is the definitive Tony Bennett recording of that song. And Old Man River, my goodness, that drum solo that goes on, like a bongo solo that goes on for like 3 minutes. It's absolutely mesmerizing, and it just keeps the energy going throughout. And
Count
it really
Basie
is.
and his orchestra, baby. I love these guys. And
That's the thing,
sorry to
man.
interrupt, but I also want to make sure I get in here. There's another album by the two of them called Count Basie Swings, Tony Bennett Sings
Right.
that I also love and also made my list, but didn't quite make the combined top 50. I was kind of sad about that, but it's got some more iconic songs. One that ended up in one of my favorite movies, Swingers.
Yeah.
So I was like, yes, man, I knew this from somewhere. But yeah, what a great collaboration.
Yeah, man. I definitely I think that album's really solid, but I think we both agree that this is like the best. And yet again,
Yes.
I'll say it again, this is my favorite Tony Bennett album, and I guess by extension my favorite Count Basie album.
Hey,
But I
there
think
you go.
it's a great I think you do come for Tony Bennett on this one, but I think it's a great compliment of these two. And yet again, Tony Bennett, like, if you guys have not seen his performance of I Left My Heart in San Francisco at Carnegie Hall during his last concert, like, 95 years old, and he's like hitting like high C's like it's nobody's business. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
if you can't consider him one of the greatest singers after that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
what you can say.
Exactly, man. Beautiful. And yeah, that is just another great pick on this episode, guys. So now that will bring us to number 26. The Boss of the Blues sings Kansas City Jazz by Big Joe Turner from 1956. Big Joe makes the list yet again. And man, this record, man, this is absolutely one of my favorites of the whole countdown. I think it
Me
should be
too.
way higher. This is in my top 50 of all time. And it's just one of those albums that the first time I heard it, I was just like transported. Like I felt like I was back in time, like in this small club. It just feels like you're in this obviously Kansas City. I was like, it almost feels like a New Orleans style because you got the jazz, you've got blues. Like it feels like the origins of just rock and roll in general, but even more so than the rock and roll album, this one feels firmly rooted in jazz, and I think it has to do with just all the other musicians that are playing on here. I also love how they're playing in such synchronicity on a lot of these songs, all the horns doing these just amazing fills on songs like Rollin' Pete and I Want a Little Girl, which is just so fun lyrically. Big Joe just, going after it. Low Down Dog. You're Driving Me Crazy is an absolute favorite on here. There's really not a weak track, even though Cherry Red, the song that opens the album, It feels like production value wise isn't quite on
Yeah.
par with the rest of them, but it's still a good tune, man. Like every single song on here has something different to offer. It's so fun. It's just like I don't know what else to say, but this was absolutely in my top 5 on my personal list. So
Mm.
for those of you who haven't heard it yet, please check it out because I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's funny the things that you said because I echo a lot of the same sentiments. And it's funny you mentioned top 50. This actually got moved out of my top 50, number 51.
But it was number 10 on my list, so
I think it should make the top 10. I think it's one of the best albums on this countdown. I absolutely love this all-time great album. Even put it above Thriller. I think we agree there. It's how much I love this, and I think it's so vastly overlooked and so vastly underrated, just like Big Joe Turner himself. And I mentioned this before on Rock and Roll, and of course, while that is certainly more of a rock and roll record, this is like the perfect fusion of blues, jazz, and swing music. Like, yet again, the production quality, besides on Cherry Red, which I have to mention is being such a yet again, these are very innuendo laced songs, and for Cherry Red, I mean, it's pretty upfront what it's talking about, especially for its time. So you got to respect the hell out of it lyrically and musically, even if it's not quite up to snuff production wise with the rest of the songs, which is a small criticism I have against it. But you said, to my point I was going to make a minute ago, you said, this feels like the birth of rock and roll. Well, I really think Big Joe Turner was the father of rock and roll, because of course Rollin' Pete, while the re-recorded version here I prefer much more than the original, was honestly the first proto rock and roll song recorded in the 30s. So it's nice to hear Big Joe and Pete Johnson come back and really make the song even better than it was before. Pete Johnson on keys, again, I have to mention how great this guy was. Really makes this album what it is. And I have to mention I Want a Little Girl, which I think is just so painstakingly beautiful. The brass solos on this are just absolutely gobsmacking. I really can't express how much I love this song. That is my favorite. But of course, the Low Down Dog is so, it's just so great and so much fun. And so vindictive in a way that doesn't seem that way, I guess. Yet again, it's just the energy and the playing here. The arrangements on this album are just absolutely outstanding, I think. And yet again, there's an intimacy to it that some of these other records don't have. You Driving Me Crazy, What Did I Do is like one of the best hooks. Hey, you driving me crazy. And I'm pretty sure they're snapping on there, aren't they?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
it's, oh man, just that opening horn riff is just absolutely incredible. One of my favorite songs on here for sure. And you can say the same thing for How Long Blues, St. Louis Blues. Yet again, lyrically, one of the absolute best songs, and definitely ahead of its time in regards to how open they are, and what they're saying in this certain situation about this girl who's sleeping around and kind of leaving this guy in the dust. Piney Brown Blues is a great way to close this album. Really, the only song I'm not huge on is We Baby Blues, which is like 7 minutes long. So not bad, but it certainly doesn't help me, love it to the extent I could have. But yet again, this is one of the absolute best albums of the 50s. This blows anything Elvis did out of the water, as far as I'm concerned, and you agree with me as well. Yet again, I think we're on the same exact page on
This
this
is how
album.
much I love it. I own it already on vinyl. So
And I don't, so I gotta
be
get
on the
on that.
lookout, everybody. I will be doing a review of this in the near future because it's fantastic.
And I can't wait to hear your full thoughts on this album, man, because it's one of my favorites. And yet again, I'm glad I wasn't sure when I first heard it. I knew it was one of my favorites, but I didn't know how you'd feel about it. And I'm glad that for once we're in complete agreement on this.
Oh, definitely, dude. Yeah, great one. So now this will bring us to number 25. Birth of the Cool by Miles Davis. Miles makes the list yet again, and this was released in 1957. It's actually a compilation album from songs that were recorded in 1949 and 1950. So, hence the name Birth of the Cool. Like these were, Miles coming onto the scene, but didn't really see the light of day by the label until later. But it's just, you can see right away what Miles is all about if like this is your introduction to him. And it's just a perfect name too, because he is the coolest of the jazz players in my mind. Like he just has that signature sound. And these songs are a little bit, we talked about Roundabout Midnight, and that one is a bit slower overall. This one has a little more pep on songs like Move, Jeru. But then, you got beautiful tracks like Moon Dreams,
Oh,
Venus
yeah.
de Milo. I don't think I pronounced that correctly, but then you've got like Boplicity and Rocker. So it's like it runs the gamut of like all these different moods, although overall you still have that Miles coolness. And yeah, it's wild to think we started the countdown with Miles with the quintet at number 50, and now we're starting the upper half at number 25
Wow.
with Miles. So kind of cool. And so now he's already been on the list 3 times,
Three
correct?
times, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Man, wild. And we might not even be done with him yet, but yeah, great pick, guys.
Yeah, I think this is great. I had it lower down on my list, probably maybe near the bottom 10. But
Yeah, me too.
the thing that is great about this, I mean, this really was that transitional uh, point between bebop and hard bop, and it's really obvious to see yet again, and still not quite to the hard bop era yet, but you could really see the makings of it here. Yet again, songs like Moon Dreams is just like unbelievably beautiful. The arrangement, the chord progression, everything. I think Venus de Milo just lives rent free in my head. I think that's one of Miles Davis' most absolute immediate, catchy, and iconic tunes, penned by Jerry Mulligan, of course, who plays saxophone. I believe on this album, I can fact check that, baritone saxophone actually. And yet again, like the first half of this album is really, really incredible. Yet again, the energy is never really slouching at all. Not as huge on maybe like the last few songs. Not that there's a bad track on here at all. I just think it loses a bit of momentum for me personally. But this really is an incredibly important jazz recording, especially considering Capitol kind of dropped him after this because they didn't see a future in him, which is kind of crazy because he really changed the face of jazz and the entirety of the genre for the rest of history. But yeah, and I think even recordings like this, it's pretty easy to see why. And so many iconic players on here as well. Of course, I mentioned Mulligan, but also Max Roach on drums on a few of these sessions as well. And you could go on and on, but yet again, I really think this is an important record. And while I had it lower on my list, I kind of understand why it's higher, because it really is just such a transitional marking that I think still holds up very well to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. So perfect placing, as we said. And yeah, that'll now bring us to number 24. At Carnegie Hall by Harry Belafonte from 1959. Absolutely love this album. If you saw recently on my channel, I've done a full album review of this. So yes, I own this one as well. And yeah, for good reason, man. This is another absolute classic. Another one that was in my top 5 on my list. And yeah, I love every song on here. That if you watch my review, you know that this is another one of those instances where it's like you feel like you went through a time portal, and you're just here. The production quality is so crystal clear,
Insane.
and the his just Harry Belafonte was incredible, man. And this is perfect proof of that, just how he's, has complete control over the audience, not just in the performances, but even in the banter in between the songs as he's telling the stories of, some of these songs like Jamaica Farewell and Man Piaba, which is hilarious. Like you have these like really funny songs mixed with some of these like tear jerking ballads like Take My Mother Home. Then you have just like amazing takes on these classics like John Henry. And of course, you've got Deo, the banana song that he's very well known for. You've got the closing track, Matilda, which goes on, I think, 10 plus minutes, but it's worth every second of it. It's just so joyous, and like hearing everyone sing along in the crowd. The musicians that are playing with him on stage, just top notch. And he's running the gamut too, like even doing Jewish songs like Hava Nagila, and like and he sells every single performance, man. He puts his heart into every song on here. Danny Boy, just another hilarious song, Mama Look a Boo Boo. I love it, man, bringing his heritage of like calypso music and island music and making it mainstream, and while also paying tribute to some of these other genres. It's just a tour de force, man, and it's my favorite Harry Belafonte album. So yeah, glad it made the list.
Well, I get it completely, man. I'll put it this way: it's definitely my favorite Harry Belafonte album of the '50s. It made my, believe it or not, only top 15 on my list, which was unbelievable to me, because I thought this was for sure top 10, but there's just more that I kept listening to, and the further it went down, but it didn't go down too far, because this album is amazing. This is one of the greatest live albums of all time. Just right from that opening overture, you're like, wow, this is unbelievable. The production quality, the arrangements, the band he has together. Of course, directed by Bob Ballard, who he brings up quite a few times, or at least I'm pretty sure it was him who was, yes, hold on.
Oh, Bob Corman was the guy who a lot of Bobs, you could say. But yet
Yes.
again, like,
Just the way he introduced, the first part of the album, he's still tapping into that very socially conscious side of his art. With songs like Sylvie and John Henry, very, very bold songs, be putting out there at the time, but have a lot to say. Of course, I love his interpretation of the Marching Saints, like doing his like British impression of how, this is how people in England would do it, as a very posh type of accent. But
yet again, once you get to the New Orleans inspired part of that song, it just really absolutely swings. The musical diversity on here is incredible. Like you said, hearkening back to his roots, as a black man, but also ethnically speaking with Hava Nagila, because ethnically, like, he was Catholic, but he was ethnically Jewish, so hearkening back to his roots in that way as well. Of course, the classics on here, like Banana Boat song. I'm actually not I'm in love with this version. I just think it's so inferior to the original, but I think the arrangement on Jamaica Farewell is absolutely sublime. A really, really beautiful take on it. Man Piaba is hysterical. Yet again, the way he interacts with the audience, you could really get a full sense of like his charisma
and his appeal as a performer. Even though like you hear some breaks, like there's one point on Mama Look a Boo Boo, he's like, I got carried away, and you don't know what he did that he got carried away with, but you can only imagine what he's doing on stage, and how that interaction came about. And yet again, feels like you're right in the room this whole time. And I just find it strange that live albums from the 50s sounded better than like actual studio recordings. Like, I've
Yeah.
never understood that, because it feels like it should be a less controlled environment, but that's absolutely not the case. Yet again, his version of Man Smart Woman Smarter on here is amazing. Danny Boy is quite beautiful. But yet again, my favorite song on here is Kukururu Kuku Paloma, which yet again apparently might be gibberish in some way, but just his Spanish pronunciation and his tone, like, this really is Belafonte's best vocal performance, hands down. The control he has when he gets to that high G and just seamlessly flips into his falsetto, it's really unbelievable. I think Belafonte sounds better live than he does in the studio and on studio recordings a lot of times.
Yeah.
But yet again, the 10-minute plus Matilda is absolutely a showstopper on here. This last side of the album is just incredible, and yet again, I love it's like woman over 40, you know, like the people he's like yelling, people own scholarship, you know. Yet again, it's so much fun. You can tell how much fun the audience is having performing with Belafonte, the way he's interacting with Bob and the band. It's yet again, it's just such a incredible way to close this incredible record. Yet again, I think this one sometimes goes overlooked. I have it on vinyl too, but I'm too lazy to pull it out. Sorry. But yeah, again, he's got it, so it makes up for it. And yeah, again, this is such an iconic record and one of the absolute best albums from the 50s. Should be higher on the list, but hey, if you haven't heard Belafonte at Carnegie Hall, you should absolutely check it out, because you're doing a disservice if you don't listen to this, quite honestly.
Yeah, and absolutely. One other thing I forgot to mention earlier is like the way that the album is paced and the order of it. It almost feels like an American history lesson or something as well. You know, starting with those older tracks and then kind of going a little more global as it goes. It's just beautiful. In a way, it reminds me in that regard of like the Smile Sessions or something, even though this was a live
Interesting.
performance. But yeah,
Really?
I think it's just like an amazing part of American history in general. And Belafonte has become one of my favorite artists, let alone
Yeah.
vocalists. So
Me too, man. Like I think he's one of the best of the 50s, and I decided to check this out like shortly after he died last year, and it's just hearing, you know, all this vitality. It's hard to think that, you know, at this point this guy has like transitioned off this planet, but yet
Yeah.
again, you know, the indelible impact he's had on music in this decade and just in general as a human being and as an activist. It's truly nothing short of extraordinary, and I think this is one of his finest achievements as an artist.
Yep. And we agree it should be higher, but
Yes,
hey,
sir.
what are you gonna do? So now at number 23.
Something Else by Cannonball Adderley from 1958, another gem of the hard bop era, of course. A very iconic record with some of the best players in jazz, including Miles Davis on trumpet, and of course Cannonball Adderley on alto saxophone, as well as Hank Jones on piano, Sam Jones on bass, and Art Blakey on drums, who isn't quite apparent on this record, and I think kind of plays, it takes a back seat to a lot of these players, specifically Adderley and Davis. You know, it's really interesting how this album came about, because I guess Davis offered Adderley to tour with him, but he said no, but, you know, like, we'll make up for the favor later, and so Miles, you know, agreed to play on this record in these sessions, and it really is to such great effect, because I cannot picture listening to another jazz version of Autumn Leaves without Miles' amazing trumpet solo. It's just so iconic and used to great effect at the end of American Fiction as well. It's just funny because I listened to this album right after I'd seen that movie, at least a couple weeks after, and
I didn't
yet
realize
again,
that was on there. Yeah, wow.
yeah,
Okay.
that's the opening track there. Might even, you could make an argument for being the best song on here as well. Yet again, their interpretation of Cole Porter's "Love for Sale" is really such a innovative one and so imaginative in the way they take that song and deconstruct it to a really fast hard bop tune. Yet again, there's some songs later in the set, like I think the Nat Adderley song I'm not as huge on, but Dancing in the Dark, not the Bruce Springsteen version, really might be, you know, the briefest on this album at 4 minutes, but it is by far the most beautiful song on here. And I just think a perfect way to close out this really great record that really features specifically Davis and Adderley at their absolute best.
Yeah, man. A great one. One that I don't recall for sure when I listened to this, because it was somewhere in the midst of compiling these albums. but didn't quite make my list, but I definitely can see how a lot of you would have loved this one. But yeah, another just really solid jazz album. And as you mentioned, some of the greats on here, Cannonball himself, Miles, Art Blakey, of course. And man, I did not realize, no wonder, American Fiction, I just really love that movie altogether. So that makes perfect sense that that would have had a track from this. But yeah, everything on here is great. And another great pick from everyone here. So that is going to bring us now to number 22.
I'm singing in the rain.
The Singin' in the Rain motion picture soundtrack from 1952. It seems like this is the only movie soundtrack on this list, but I mean, come on, this is like the most iconic musical in all of cinema. I mean, it makes sense. These songs are so iconic, of course, taking a lot of, Brown and Freed classics and reinterpreting them for this specific musical ended up working so well in so many ways. I mean, one, because this movie is so imaginative. It's a great satire on Hollywood. The choreography is like some of the best you'll ever see in all of cinema. But yet again, the interpretation of these songs, how they utilize them into the narrative itself is quite incredible and just so iconic. Now, the version I'm talking about is the much more condensed version because, of course, they released the full soundtrack later in the 90s, but so the order on here is a bit skewed and a little off, but yet again, opening with Singing in the Rain, I mean, come on, just as soon as Gene Kelly opens his mouth and goes, I'm singing in the rain, I mean, come on, you just, when he humps, anyway, when he hops up on the pole in the rain, it's like one of the most iconic moments.
Humping in the Rain is a different movie.
Might have to make that one at some point. No, but yet again, it's just one of those moments where you're like, this is what cinema is made for, and I think by far the most amazing song on this album. But yet again, you have so many great tracks. Make 'Em Laugh.
Oh yeah, and if you've seen the movie, the Make 'Em Laugh scene is incredible, man.
Oh, Donald O'Connor was so he should have been nominated, let alone maybe even won an Oscar for that movie, but he should have been at least been nominated. What he does in that, but especially in that scene. Though of course you can tell on the soundtrack, like a lot of being the soundtrack, you don't have the visual component to it, and there's a lot of spaces where he stops talking, doing a lot of physical comedy that you don't see, and doesn't entirely translate across. Yet again, some of these songs are a bit dated as well. Like All I Do Is Dream of You. It's a little corny 50s stuff. But yet again, Moses is amazing. Good Morning, I mean, is just right up there with Singing in the Rain. The interplay between Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor, and of course the legendary Debbie Reynolds as well. Yet again, this version specifically, if you can find the original track listing, is pretty short and to the point. All the songs are great in some way. I can't really fault it. This was just outside my top 10 of the 50s. I think this is one of the best movie soundtracks of all time to one of the greatest films of all time. And I'm really glad to see it very high on this list, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great pick. I didn't have it quite that high. It was in the 40s for me. But yeah, definitely. And I'm not one that really likes musicals in general, but this is definitely great film, no matter what genre you're looking at.
Yeah, how can you not like this?
Yeah, and it's a classic. And if you also love, movies like La La Land, it was heavily inspired by this film for sure. And musically, yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. And just, all those songs you mentioned, them, they're classics, and you can just envision the scenes that they come from, and yeah, the film. I was surprised how much I also loved it. So, yeah, I think it's at a pretty good spot here on the list overall. So great pick, guys, and that will now bring us to number 21.
Dale, Dale. I mean, come on. You had to knew that this was coming. Calypso by Harry Belafonte from 1956. As I said, Belafonte at Carnegie Hall is my favorite Belafonte album from this era, but this is easily his most iconic record, and most notably the first album to ever sell a million LPs. And interestingly enough, that accolade went to a black man, which I don't think a lot of people necessarily mention just offhand, but if you know the legacy of Harry Belafonte, you know he was the first one to do it, and it's not hard to see why. I mean, this album really brought the sounds of Calypso to the American public, but also throughout the entire world, with iconic songs like Day-O, the Banana Boat song, which, you know, lives on in legend to this day, of course immortalized in Beetlejuice, where a lot of people got introduced to it for the very first time. And absolutely amazing, like, how he subtly integrates a lot of, you know, cultural messages through these songs, you know, about these guys, you know, working in Jamaica at these ports on the boat all day, these hardworking men, and that's how they get through the day, you know, tallying the banana, and, you know, yet again, a great blue-collar worker song, especially for that place. But, of course, you know, you got great ballads like I Do Adore Her with Belafonte just absolutely in peak on vocals, and, of course, the vocal crossings that happen on that song with the other singer as well, you know, singing with him is absolutely amazing. Of course, Jamaica Farewell, which is, it might as well be my favorite Harry Belafonte song, is just so painstakingly beautiful. You know, of course, the down the way where the nights are gay and the sun shine daily on the mountain top. I mean, just, oh my goodness, it's so poetic too. These Lord Burgess tunes, they're just absolutely incredible. Of course, great fun, like Will His Love Be Like His Rum with the flute that's a little off key, with these really bold and big backing vocals behind Belafonte on these songs that really flesh these songs out in a big way. Yet again, some of this album sounds a little bit dated, which is why it's not higher on my list. Like, and some of it's a bit corny, like the beginning of Dolly Dawn, but yet again, that's still a great song overall. It's just so catchy. Yet again, the Jackass song is so much fun. The flute comes back in such a big way, and yet again, just fun throughout this entire album. Hosanna is a little bit more dated with the like the very operatic and over the top backing vocals, but still a really good song. You know, like you can't really knock any of the songs on this album except Starro, which is basically a repeat of the Banana Boat song for some reason. That's what's really holding this album back too for me. But Come Back Liza, amazing ballad, just lyrically so plaintive, but the way it builds with, you know, a singular phrase and how that, you know, attains a new meaning as the song goes along, as this narrative unfolds, is really incredible. Brown Skin Girl, yet again, 1956, he's talking about miscegenation, all the way back then, but in a very humorous way, and yet again, he's like inserting some sort of, you know, type of ideas about colonialism in there. It's very subtle, but that's what I love about it. It's never beating you over the head, but he's still inserting this and relaying it in a way that's kind of coded, but still very accessible. And of course, Man Smart, Woman Smart, I mentioned it on Belafonte at Carnegie Hall. I think this is the definitive version, and yet again, where Harry's humor really shines through on here, the way he, you know, makes dramatic pauses where, you know, like talking about seeing the baby's eyes was blue. It wasn't not by
mine.
me.
Yeah,
And it's just absolutely incredible. And yet again, to be talking, you know, essentially making a feminist song in 1956. I mean, it really, this guy was socially ahead of its time in so many ways, and the fact that this was the first record to sell a million copies is quite extraordinary when you take that into consideration. Honestly, I think this should be in the next episode. I had this at number 17 on my list. I think it's pretty close too, but considering how iconic the pedigree of this record is, I'm surprised it wasn't a little bit higher, but really glad to see it on the list nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked already a bit about Belafonte on this very episode, and for that reason, I love at Carnegie Hall so much. This one for me doesn't quite live up to that. I had it, I think, in the 30s on my list,
Okay.
but you've got to have it. I mean, just for all the reasons you mentioned. And some of these are like the definitive versions when you really think
Yeah.
about it, like Deo. But yeah, it's just if I'm gonna be listening to Harry, I think I'm gonna come back more often to at Carnegie Hall, even though this one is like condensed, shorter, and has a couple more songs that aren't
It's
on that. But yeah,
it's
what were
funny
you
you
saying?
mentioned that, like, because I actually come back to this one. This is one of the albums I actually come back to the most.
Okay,
Just in
yeah,
general, because it's so short, it's so sweet, and I listen to these songs like all the time. Like Harry
yeah,
Belafonte, let me be clear, is one of my favorite artists from this decade, more so than Elvis, more so than most of these people, except one, which we will bring up again, perhaps later down the line.
yeah.
And I think this one is just so immediate to me. Like these songs, yet again, not a weak track on here, even
Hmm.
Starro, because it is essentially Banana Boat song.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, we could go on and on about Belafonte, like just as a human being, what an amazing guy. Like,
Hmm.
We Are the World would not have happened without him.
That's true. That's true.
So many things like in his philanthropy and film work as well. But but yeah, man, another great one. So two Harrys on the list. And yeah, the list, guys, I think is pretty stellar overall. Like there's some things like on this episode that I would have liked to see higher, as I know you would have as well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, overall, for everything that's made it so far, I'm very happy. And yeah, just great picks, guys. So we can't wait to see on the next one. We're cracking the top 20 already. Can't believe it. And guys, that episode will be on Nathaniel's channel. So please, if you have not subscribed to him yet, what are you waiting for? And other great content on there as well, movie reviews as well as music. So definitely check it out. And yeah, can't wait to do the next one with you, man. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, thank you, John. Once again, I can't wait to get in. Yet again, I've never been happier on a single episode than this one, and I won't be
Yeah.
too upset from now on. But it's yet again, this is the most solid list we've had so far, and yeah, I can't wait to see what happens next week.
Yeah, man. Well, we will see you then. Peace.
Matilda singar, Nicholas Matilda singar.